Dialogue, a presentation of the Public Affairs and Special Events Department of KLRB News.
This is Dialogue Assassination with research specialist Mae Brussell. For KLRB, I'm Gloria Barron. Well, Mae, this is sort of the anniversary show, not of the show per se, but like 8 years ago today, and I'll remind the listening audience that we are recording this on Tuesday. 8 years ago today, you started your research on the assassination of John Kennedy, right?
That's right. It's been 8 years, Gloria, and a lot of things come to mind. You know, when I read the paper yesterday about the celebration of various religious services and dedication services in memory of John Kennedy, and I got up and I looked at my study, my library, and I looked around the walls, you know, and the books and closets and the documents. And it was a time of contemplation, like, what is this all about? You know, to work on something for so long with so much dedication and
8 years now, right?
It's 8 years, yes. And I brought in the name of the people who also began their work that same day, and none of us knew each other. And it may be of interest to people who are listening, because on November 24th, 1963, when Jack Ruby walked in and shot Lee Harvey Oswald, I became very concerned, and I called my family on the telephone, and I said, what do you think has happened to America? Did Ruby do this to silence Oswald? Was there a conspiracy? Who is controlling the country? Will the evidence show that Oswald did it alone? And I was very concerned about his being killed in the police department. And in that same day, there were other persons, I'll mention their names: Maggie Field in Beverly Hills, California; Penn Jones in Midlothian, Texas; Mark Lane in New York; David Lifton in Los Angeles; Sylvia Mayer in New York; Raymond Marcus in L.A., Shirley Martin in Oklahoma; Leo Savage in New York; Joe Justine in Germany; Hal Verb in El Cerrito, California; Harold Weisberg in Maryland; and Mae Brussell in West Los Angeles, began to save articles on the assassination and became curious about what happened. And they refer to us in the literature as the buffs, the assassination buffs, the original buffs. There was an article in Ramparts that I helped write on the John Kennedy murder. It was done, many years ago, around 1966. And that insert there was by Penn Jones on the death that had occurred to people involved with the assassination that were close to the assassination scene. And David Welch came down to my house. He worked with Ramparts, and I helped him write the article. And I kept my name out of the article. He listed the other buffs. But at that time, I wanted privacy, at least for a few years, and did not want to be in the public eye at all, because I was very curious about Lee Harvey Oswald, the person. And all the other people working on the assassination were concerned with the ballistics, the bullet trajectory, the autopsy, the shooting of Officer Tippit. And my interest was in Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby, who they knew, where they met and associated, and what contacts they had. Were they set up to be killed, to act as a decoy? I was interested in them as human beings, how you use ordinary citizens from your community to effect changes in history. And I spent many years charting the course of documenting the banks they went to, the associations they had in common. Jack Ruby didn't know Oswald, but there was a link of common people that worked together. And on one of the shows I mentioned some of those links. And through the years, these assassination buffs got to know each other. We would correspond. It started, I think, when Mark Lane began to tour a few areas like Berkeley, and he spoke at Beverly Hills High School. And Maggie Fields heard about him. He had been to Dallas, and she contacted him to speak. And so I met him, and I knew Maggie, or met her through this work. And then we got the address of other people, and we began long-distance telephone calls and exchanging letters. And Some of them have published books. Some are still coming. Penn Jones has 4 books out. Maggie Fields has a book documented that has never been published. And Sylvia Meyer did Accessories After the Fact and the Index to the Warren Report. David Lifton has a book that'll be out soon. He spent 7 years working on. Jojo Steen's written 7 books on the subject. Harold Weisberg has written 4 books, and he has a new one called Frame Up on James Earl Way. Leo Savage did 1 book, and Raymond Marcus has done many articles. Shirley Martin has never written a book, but she continues to feed information to other researchers, and we all got to know each other. And we stayed with the subject. And I have a poem that I saved I like to read. It's appropriate to this anniversary, Gloria. It's a poem appropriate to the whole situation, written by Carl Sandburg. And it was written to Archibald MacLeish after the last war because he gave up the work on his Massachusetts farm to help work for freedom against the Nazis. And this is the way the poem reads. Thomas Jefferson had red hair and a violin, and he loved life and people and music and books and writing and quiet thoughts. He was a lover of peace, decency, good order, summer corn ripening for the bins of winter, cows in green pastures, colts sucking at mares, apple trees waiting to laugh with pippins. Jefferson loved peace like a good farmer, and yet for 8 years he fought in a war. Writing his own hand, the war announcement named the Declaration of Independence. And there was his friend and comrade, Ben Franklin, the printer, bookman, diplomat, and all Franklin asked was that they leave him alone so he could do his work as a lover of peace and work. And Franklin, too, fought war for 8 years. And the same Franklin who said 2 nations would be better throw dice than go to war. He went in with the fighters for freedom, and for 8 years he threw all he had into his books, print shop, and fun with electricity, research, and science. And he applied these, but he had to wait until he joined himself for 8 long years of war for freedom and independence. Now, of course, these 2 odd fellows stand as only 2 among many. The list runs long of these fellows, lovers of peace, decency, good order, who throw in with their all they've got for the abstraction of freedom and independence. Strictly, they were gentlemen, not hunting trouble. Strictly, they wanted quiet and the good life and freedom, and they would rather have the horses of instruction than those 8 years they gave to the tigers of wrath. The record runs they were both dreamers. At the same time, they refused imitations of the real thing, and at the same time, they stood up and talked back, and at the same time, they met the speech of steel and cunning with their own relentless steel and cunning. Now, because it's 8 years since the assassination, this is an appropriate poem. I read this poem out at MPC, and one of the students asked me, do you compare yourself to Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson? And I reminded him that in the 3rd verse of the poem, it says that those 2 men were only 2 among many. And of course I compare myself to them because I have things that I would like to do, like watch the apples ripen on the tree, and I would like to be sewing dresses and cutting fabrics, you know, the hobbies that I have, Gloria, and I would like to be baking bread for Thanksgiving. I have a conflict. Am I going to use a mix and do my research? Will I use cake mixes because I want to make my own thing? Do I have the time? Do I do my research? Am I going to buy my holiday presents? Every year I say, am I going to buy or am I going to make the things I want to make? I have the talent. I have the interest. I want to put these things together. I want to do my own cooking and creating, and I don't like to buy bought things or packaged things. And then the research pulls me back. All year it pulls me back to the things I really want to do that are important in my life, and I have to put them aside, a lot of them. I try to reach a compromise, and a lot of times I can't. I have put aside many, many things for 8 years because you have to speak back with steel. You have to answer steel with steel, and you have to refuse imitations of the real thing. Everybody is taking an imitation of the real thing, and they're giving it all kinds of names like credibility gap or national security or top secrets. And I could bring to you, the listeners, over the air, all the articles I shared with Gloria this morning when I came in that were in the news this week of actual repressions, of laws coming down, of the harm that has happened since the assassination, because people accept the phony for the real. That wasn't a real election in 1964. It's not a real election in 1968, any more than the election of Thieu was an election in Vietnam. But you accept that. You accept the paper this morning of what Muskie is saying or Hubert Humphrey is saying. They're just puppets. They're puppets of a system that are propped up. Or you think McCloskey is a liberal. You don't read his voting record, how he really votes on every issue, because you like these pat, comfortable answers. This has been one of the big problems. Jules Fiber had a cartoon in Sunday's paper, and two gentlemen are talking to each other, and one man is standing with his hands behind his back with ropes, and he says, "My hands are tied, right?" And then he says, "My feet are shackled, right? And my eyes are blindfolded, right? And my movements are, and he starts to mumble. And the other man looks at him and says, "When do you break free?" And the man who's tied and shackled says, "What do you mean break free? I like it." And that's about where people are today in the community and in the nation at large. They don't mind the position they're in, and it's difficult to shake them to the fact of what happened in Dallas in 1963. And I will read part, as much time allows out on the second half, the new issue of Computer and Automation, which came this week to my home, the November 1971 issue. And the statement above the article, it's on the assassination of President Kennedy, the pattern of coup d'etat and public deception. And it begins with this quotation of the author, Edmund Berkeley. "We must begin to recognize history as it is happening to us. We can no longer toy with illusions. Our war adventures in Asia are not related to national security in any rational sense. A coup d'etat took place in the United States on November 22nd, 1963, when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated." Now, that came 8 years after I began my research, Gloria, and when people talk about never having fascism in this country or never being overthrown, they have already been overthrown and they're not aware of it. And this can be documented, how the laws come down and they're not aware of it. And I was invited to the high school this week to speak to one of the classes, a group of seniors, on revolutionary change. And I went to the class, and we had a 1-hour discussion which barely gets into the subject of how the government was overthrown and what way you get it back again. You have to have a revolution to get it back, either an intellectual or a spiritual or a practical or a bloody revolution to get the country and the economy and the beauty of this nation back into some natural course of sanity. And when I was through, the teacher was somewhat in a state of shock. You know, his mouth was open, and he couldn't believe what I was saying. And he's teaching these young people revolutionary change. And I said, the reason the people are dropping out of school or finding what they're learning in the class is not meaningful is that the teachers can't tell them what has happened to them. Therefore, they can't instruct them on how to survive or explain the news of the day. The teachers themselves will not face the fact that the country was overthrown. So how can they teach a class on American history that is meaningful to the people that are going out into today's society?
When the whole basis of this country is freedom, and how could they explain to the kids that there was a coup d'etat?
Well, that's right. The whole basis of free speech, of free choice, of candidates and places to meet and congregate and express your opinion, but you're photographed at every meeting you go to. There's recordings of your voice. You're put into a data system. The threat of losing a job or getting a security clearance hangs over you, your economic independence. You're intimidated down the line, and you feel it. And then what do you do with that kind of intimidation? You see, the system was set up after the political assassination of John Kennedy to bring in more repressions. And then in 1968, after the assassination of Robert Kennedy, national security and wiretapping and surveillance increased even more. So that in order to effect a change, you have to speak about a revolution now. And that's a long way off